This is the call to order for the September meeting of the Human Relations Commission. I see that quorum has already been established, so we'll move to the review and the approval of the minutes. Who does that? If everyone has had a chance to review them, or if that's what the paper shuffling is now, and whenever someone feels comfortable enough with it that they would offer a motion that we would approve.
I move to approve.
Second.
Been moved and it's been moved and second that we would approve the minutes from the August meeting. Any further discussion? All those in favor say. Okay.
Yeah, I was in attendance at the last meeting.
We're so embarrassed.
No problem.
Are there any other changes or corrections? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposers? All right, we've approved the minutes and the financial update.
Yes. If I might, Chair, I would like to welcome we have a couple new commissioners who have not been with us yet. And so I would love to just say welcome and perhaps have you guys just say a few words. Just let us know a little bit about yourselves. Nancy?
Thank you. Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm Nancy Youssef. I live in Nashville. I've lived here for almost 13 years. In the Belmont area, I work for Souls for Souls as their Chief Business Development Officer, and I'm really happy and thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me in this group.
Hi everyone, my name is Jorge. Apologies I couldn't make it last week, but I was sick. I tested negative and I'm in good health now. I am an immigrant. I am from Guatemala originally. I've been an organizer for a few years, most recently with Workers' Dignity, and I am currently in law school. Very happy to be here with you all. Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome to the commission, both of you.
Okay, and yes, well, thank you, you guys. I've had an opportunity to talk to both of you. Jorge, I still owe you like a full-on orientation, if I remember correctly. I've got to do that with Nancy, and I'm just really excited to have you guys at the table. I think that you will find, like I do, that this is it's just a great group to do work with here in Metro. Some truly committed folks, committed to civil rights and human rights. And so welcome. Okay, financial report. As you know, it does not require a vote. It is informational and gives you an opportunity to ask questions. And we are, for folks who are new, we are on a July 1 to the end of June fiscal year. So we are only like two and a half months into our current fiscal year. And I don't have really anything exciting to report. You can see in the report where we're spending our money. And as you all will also recall, we tend to be a little conservative in spending our money at the beginning of the year. Is quite often for this commission in having, we have to respond to things that are happening in the community. So we try to protect some of our budget throughout the year, you know, to be able to not be real tight at the end of the year. And I've come to realize like just how important that is. For instance, our sort of saving money on the front end last fiscal year afforded us the opportunity to provide financial support for the eviction outreach and court watch initiative in partnership with PATH and some other organizations. So that funding is going directly to the work that they're doing. And it's helped us be able to pay for some interns. So that's, we're right on budget so far this year. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So, actually, it would be helpful to me in looking at this if I'm assuming that there is a projected monthly expense that you would have. And looking at this, it gives me what the actuals are, but it doesn't give me information about sort of what our projected was through this period of time. Is there a way to modify the format? You know what I'm getting at?
I do. Yes, I hear you. And I do not believe that there's a way to modify the reporting that we get from finance, right? Through this R12 or whatever the thing is. And that's what sort of produces this. But that doesn't mean that my office can't develop our own projected going forward, just adding an additional column. Yeah.
I mean, if that would be possible and it wouldn't burden the staff too much, because I know you have limited staff and lots of things to do, just in terms of, for our purposes, it would be helpful to get some sense of sort of where we are in the year with respect to what's expected to be spent over a period of time.
Absolutely. And I am happy to talk to Mark about doing that. Mark does our operations and special projects, and he does all the things that I don't want to do, including that. So I'll ask Mark what he thinks of the most efficient way to do that might be. Great, thank you.
All right, the next item is the debrief from the September 8th public hearing on the evictions. I'll give way to Mel here, but first I just want to thank all the commissioners, particularly the executive committee, who got together quickly and put together what I think was a great event. I also want to thank the commission for voting so emphatically that we move forward with this, and we're really looking forward to the next three. And I gotta give a big shout out to all of the human relations. Well, I don't wanna say all because it makes it sound like it's a lot of people. To the 2 or 3 people who are in the office of the commission to pull this together. Everyone was, I think it was 9 presenters, I believe. They were all on time, they were all prepared. I think the questions that came from the commission were relevant to the issue. I've heard I've gotten several emails and comments from individuals that all think that this was a great forum to just talk about this pressing situation that is in our community. So I am ecstatic and I'm appreciative for your approval of this, and particularly to the executive committee who just took this thing and did what they did with it to make it what it is. Appreciate that. Go ahead and start the...
Sure, and I want to also say, there were, some commission members, in particular, Commissioner Robinson and, Commissioner Burton, who do not currently serve on the executive board, but attended the planning meetings, and were really instrumental in helping us think out, the best way to do it. So thank you so much for the commitment. Yes. And I too have gotten a pretty incredible response from it. Yes, a lot of texts and emails and people saying like how important it was that we did that. And I won't lie to you, there was a little part of me that was like, what are folks going to tell us that we don't already know? Well, I learned my lesson. I think that we definitely did learn some challenges that I don't think we were aware of. And we heard some solid recommendations for policies and procedures that we can now turn back around and start advocating. And to that end, Liz Orozco, hi Liz. Liz is our, excuse me, you guys, I'm sorry. Liz is our Director of Policy and Research, and she also leads our internship program. And so she is spearheading putting together a final report from that hearing. And I don't know, Liz, if you had an ETA that you were shooting for?
Before the next one?
Okay, great. Sounds good. Which is October 6th. So, so we will have that report out. And one of our goals is not only to sort of be scribes for those recommendations, but to put as much context as we can, including, who is it exactly that we might need to advocate to, right, with regard to the recommendations that are made. So they're not just bald recommendations. And our goal is also to continue working with the 9 presenters that we had, to have them be advocates along with us on the recommendations that were made. Because really, when it comes down to it, the 9 folks who testified were among the most knowledgeable in the city, clearly, on the crisis that we're facing, barring those who themselves are facing eviction. So keeping them engaged, and I think that that's the best thank you we could give to them for taking 2.5 hours. I mean, these were real leaders in the community, and for them to take 2.5 hours to come be a part of it, and they all stayed. Like, that to me was also really impressive, that it wasn't people just came and said their piece and left. Like, they were engaged in the process and wanted to hear what other folks said. And I think that was a big goal for the commission, to have that cross conversation. If you have not had an opportunity to watch the video, I forgive you, because I just sent it yesterday. We were waiting for it to get uploaded. But I definitely strongly recommend that you find some time to listen to it. You don't even necessarily have to watch it, but if you can listen to that hearing. And my ask of you is, after hearing that, just give us some feedback, right, on the things that you were most compelled by, things that you heard, recommendations that you yourself might make coming out of what you heard, And thank you, Commissioner Dash, who already did that without being asked. I appreciate it. But yeah, I'd really appreciate that because, at the end of the day, we want this set of recommendations and this report to really be from this body.
Are there any observations that any of the participants would like to make, or just in general from the commission about this event? Commissioner Dash.
I just wanted to make a couple. So I think logistically, this goes back to the conversation. And I want to give a huge shout out to Linda because she foresaw this. But we were talking about timing and we were like, oh, it's going to be an hour and a half or 2 hours. And Linda was like, y'all know, like people are going to get up and sit down and get up and sit down. It's going to take some time. So I think we now know, we put that 2 hour, timing for it for sure. I think the other thing that would help us as commissioners is if we had the participants had a clock facing them. It would have been helpful if commissioners had a clock facing us so we knew how long our question time was. And if we needed to sneak an extra question, and we could, but at least we know okay, let's not take too long, or maybe I can save this question for another speaker. I think that would be very helpful. So that's my logistical observation. And then I think one big thing that stood out to me content-wise was the lack of plan there was for undocumented communities. Just with legal aid not being able to assist, I thought was a really big deal. And Judge Bell really uplifting how these communities, or a lot of communities, are afraid to go to court because of their status. And so asking them to go to a court is kind of stoking a fear that is much bigger than even eviction, right? It is thinking about deportation, it's thinking about these other fears that they have. And so I think that there needs to be a plan to really outreach to all communities for sure, but undocumented communities in particular really come to mind. And then I'll leave space for other commissioners. I could go on forever, but I'll leave space for other commissioners to share as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Commissioner Tran.
I too just wanted to thank the staff for putting it together. That was stressful with the pandemic and the lack of time that we had. And that was our first one, and I thought it went really, really well. So thank you to everyone who put that together. A couple of things that struck me when we were there was that it was kind of like an insider baseball kind of game. Because structurally, as with all non-for-profits, we're not talking about the systemic problems or structural problems, but we're talking about what NGOs can do. And they fill in what we don't do, and they play within the guidelines that are dictated to them. I do think that it's telling that 2 out of the 9 were from Metro, right? And so Dr. Crooms and Judge Bell, but the rest were NGOs. And that ratio alone makes you realize that, they have to play within the guidelines. That was very clear to me. They do not reflect outside into the larger problem. And so as we move on to affordable housing, that we really do ask the bigger questions, because I feel like this one got into the nitty-gritty of the eviction process. And having said that, I think hopefully the report will kind of reflect the reality of that situation, which is there. And then also, what really struck me was the lack of communication, and all these NGOs had to go and do it because there's a lack of communication that Metro should be doing and putting out information. One of my major things would be for every detainer warrant, you should at least have require contact info for the tenant, so that PATH and NCRC are not knocking on doors over the weekend trying to find people. So it just struck me that one of the quick fixes, and probably the easiest, is just to ask Metro to communicate clearly. And I think this goes to all, either documented or undocumented, or all communities, and all the just kind of information to put out there. And I realized that what was frustrating for me is the lack of communication that was there. including forms and so forth that made it more, or forms that made it more bureaucratic and difficult to communicate. So the inside a baseball game that would be my observation. Thank you.
Well, and I do want to add to that, I think that some commissioners in our office, in talking to community advocates, realized pretty early on, I think it was April or May, when we started talking in our office about, well, there's $20 million here. And no, people don't know about it. And to me, that was a travesty, right? Communicating, and I get it, it's hard, right? Because people, we don't have some nightly news that everybody watches in all their homes. And so I know it's hard, but it's one reason that we partnered with PAF, is to say, like, people need to know that this is available and they need assistance. And the fact that grassroots community organizations are the ones who are taking it up says something about our government that I didn't like, and that I think was pretty obvious in our hearing. So what kind of responsibility do we have holding $20 million, right, to really get out there and say, this is your money? Yeah.
I do want to add one thing, and I promise I won't monopolize the time, but I was also kind of surprised and not surprised by how antiquated the data collecting and the softwares that were talked about. Like, I was so shocked at them saying oh yeah, I saw these in the 2000s, 20 years ago, it's the same software. And it's mind-blowing for me when I'm talking into this very beautiful, fancy microphone and, that kind of deal. If someone tells me this mic is from the 2000s, that would be very ironic. But I found it really surprising that the data has not been, there's a data problem on so many layers, right? The data intake is bad. There's no one actually doing there's no system for anyone actually doing data collection, and just the fact that it's been neglected was really scary for me.
Yeah, and let me put some context to that so everyone can follow along. So the evictions, when detainer warrants are basically the first thing that's filed for an official eviction, right, by a landlord. And so that goes to the court, right? And there's nothing in that process right now that requires anything other than an address and perhaps the name, right, of the tenant. So MAC and the Legacy Court and the grassroots organizations who wanted this public information in order to tell folks who have had a detainer warrant filed against them, let us help you. Here's what your rights are. Go to court, right? Don't get a default judgment. And hey, there's a diversionary housing court, the Legacy Court. There's also the potential that you may qualify for rent relief. Well, because there was nothing more than an address, what PATH was doing was getting those addresses on Friday and spending the whole weekend with volunteers, literally door knocking to try to find these folks. Now, I know the court was also, what I heard from MAC and from Dr. Kroom and from Judge Bell is that, snail mail was going out to folks. you know, but there was no telephone, sometimes no identifying information. And then more than that, the court clerk, the system in which the court records are kept is called CaseLink. And I know my office, I should have thought of this, by the way, you guys, because I know about 4 years ago, in our office, we were interested in looking at what evictions looked like, right? Well before, eviction crisis, but while we were doing all this work on affordable housing stuff, we were interested in what evictions look like. So we talked to the court clerk, and he said, oh, you get on CaseLink and you can look up all the detainer warrants that are filed. Well, the only way to do that is there's a code for the detainer warrant, and you have to click on that and it pulls up documents. Sometimes they're just like handwritten PDF documents. There's no way it's not a database, right, that you can then download all of that stuff and do analysis. So that's why the report that Red Door Collective did, in a way, that's why that report is so impressive, right? They got manpower and woman power, people power to literally go through every single one, and they had to look at every single one. I mean, it's incredibly antiquated. And it's hard for me to see how housing policy can be set when we don't have the tools to do data analysis. And that is a message that we heard from several of the folks who testified.
Any other Commissioner Venning?
Not so much on the details of that hearing, but again, going back to Commissioner Greenhouse, as far as how we would go forward in terms of doing our upcoming hearings. The next one is scheduled for 3 weeks down the road. It would have been very helpful to have some material available for us prior to the hearing so we could sort of review it. And I'm not so sure how we're going to be able to cover these other areas in even 2.5 hours effectively. We had 9 presenters, and it was really a struggle to sort of get through them. So I would opt for, perhaps 3 hours, and with some material ahead of time, and try to do as best a job as we can.
Okay, I think when we appreciate those comments, Commissioner Venning, and as we wrap this up, then we'll be moving straight into that. And when you said 3 hours, I don't think anyone will forget that. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make comment or observations?
Great idea on 3 hours, Erwin. But for Mel, on the detainer warrant issue, those are served by the sheriffs, right? Could we or some other group print like a little one-page thing in multiple languages that says, you're being evicted, here's what you can do, go to these resources? And the sheriff will serve with the warrant, and have the sheriff serve it with the warrant. Because they got to get the warrant, or else there's no service.
Well, that's true. And I think one of the complications, though, too, is the sheer number of folks who end up leaving their home without even getting to that point, right? That folks end up leaving their home before something is served by the sheriff, right? So that's even a later step, right? That's a possession step. So most people who end up being, and I could be completely wrong, but this is my understanding. And Liz, if I know you're taking notes, and you've been in the court, so correct, if I'm saying crazy stuff, you can say, Mel, what are you saying? But my understanding is, like, that gets filed, and then there's like a, you know, a due process hearing, and it isn't until the point of possession where, you know, a court says, yeah, you can take possession, that the sheriff will then serve a thing. Does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense to me because somehow the tenant has to be served with some leading process. If it's
Oh, that's
not the
true.
detaining warrant, it needs to be just a lawsuit or a civil warrant. Maybe the civil warrant is served by the landlord, so that doesn't work, but
They are getting detainer warrants before they go to court.
They are. Okay.
But the concern that was raised also at the hearing is some people will just leave if their landlord asks them to without even having to go into the court process.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a good question. Like, what kind of other information can the sheriff's office deliver along with a detainer warrant? And it seems like that's an ideal time then to be able to say, here are the resources, and here's, you know, where you can seek those resources.
I think they can deliver whatever they want. The question is, would they do it?
Well, and I think we can definitely ask if we had that resource. 'Cause in the past, Sheriff Hall has been pretty amenable to various changing of his court-appointed processes. So I think if we had the information, that we can definitely ask him to do that.
And I also think that in my experience, Sheriff Hall has been really pretty sensitive and interested in housing issues and, you know, in preventing homelessness. So I think he may be amenable to that conversation.
Just a quick comment is that a lot of what we're talking about is what Eddie Latimer brought up, which is all about transparency.
Mm-hmm.
So at every process, there's no data that we can plug into like the Princeton eviction studies or center. There's no transparency in terms of how much money is there. There's no transparency in the process and so forth. So that, as an overarching theme, is really important. Just a quick question, but is there somewhere in the Metro government, is there a website that lists the tenants' rights and resources? Does anyone know?
I don't know.
Because that could be really helpful.
Actually, the Metro Human Relations page has some has some really good pamphlets. I think back in the day, someone from Legal Aid helped develop, and then so I used to work at Legal Aid as a housing paralegal, and we used to use those. They're really nice and artsy.
Yeah, but I worked on some of those. I'm glad that this is like the library recalling, you know, a book that I have that I requested. But just some phone numbers of like Legal Aid and PATH. I mean, just basic. When you get to this point, this is what you have. These are your rights. You don't have to leave. This is the even just mapping out the process.
Yeah.
Would be really helpful in all languages, and we can include that in there. Not in terms of just the housing issue, but just in terms of like, these are the process, this is the process, this is what's about to happen, this is where you can call NCRC at this point, Legal Aid at this point, you know, so forth. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I can't think of a single location that would have that information. And in my experience, it's really uncommon, except for Metro Human Relations Commission, to include grassroots organizations as a resource in, you know, Metro messaging. But of course, we do regularly, in large part because we all know that, you know, if people are getting information from people that they already know and trust, you're more likely to get to them and to see a better result.
I had a question really more about process. So we had a hearing and a report is being drafted. What's the review process for issuing that report? Because to a certain extent, I guess I have a little bit of concern about exposing the staff to coming up with a report that it is the author of that may be critical of other portions of Metro government. Whereas if the commission reviewed the report and approved it, then technically it's the commission's report.
Well, it was my hope that that would be the process, that it would be reviewed and approved by this commission, who also authorized that we do it. A couple of observations I had that I found that were just really shocking, that MAC can approve a person to be paid, and after 90 days, it still not be paid. Their online dashboard is totally inadequate to figure out just where they are in the distribution of the funds. I'm even concerned that they may not be the best distribution network, or maybe there should be others at the table who can also operate as processors. I was impressed by the Nashville Apartment Association representative that gave the other side of this dilemma, that there are individuals who are property owners that are suffering. It's not all big-time out-of-state corporations. It's individuals who maybe have hawked their house to buy some rental property, and now they can't pay. And so there are funds in Nashville, and we're just struggling through trying to get these funds out. All of them said that additional resources are necessary. And hopefully some kind of way in this report that we put together that it can actually pinpoint some of these areas where these additional resources can be used. My last comment on this is, and Mel and I have talked about this before, all the funds that are here are only eligible for people who make 80% or less of the AMI. And what's striking about that is a single person with a kid or two making 55 grand or so does not qualify for any of the funds that are in town now. And so all of this crisis that we're talking about is just centered in one area where there's some help. But I am sure that there are individuals who fall outside of that, a very large group of individuals that fall outside of that there are no funds here to help them. And so some kind of way in this process, that has to be addressed. The other thing is, nowhere did I hear anyone, particularly from MAC or anybody, ask the U.S. Treasury for clarification on the process and procedures, because they're operating on their interpretation of them, nor have they asked for any type of lessening of some of these restrictions. And the point was made that many of the individuals who are at or below the poverty line are asked to submit forms, scan documents, get past this or that, and send it electronically when they don't have access to this. And so the response from the gatekeeper money side is their file is incomplete. And we can't get in touch with them. But that's just one half of it over against the individual's ability to be able to respond in the way that they're being required to respond. And so, again, I thought it was great, and I hope that we can move forward. Yes, Commissioner Mann.
I just wanted to ask, has there been a recommendation, as you said, looking at other organizations that can provide that education and counseling to the renters? Because there are several, housing education counselors that are HUD certified that could be used. They're trusted resources in the community because there's a lot of distrust between the landlords, the tenants, the programs. And so some of these organizations that provide housing counseling, they've been in the community forever, they have a great relationship, they're trained, and so they could also be another point to help get the funds out and to build that trust, and they follow through on getting that application complete because, you know, they're just dedicated to serving those clients. So looking at that as a recommendation to open up, who are the people certified to help get the funds out?
My understanding, and some of this is from talking to Dr. Kroom, and some of it is from the hearing itself, is that there was an RFP issued for some nonprofit support. And I'm gonna admit to you, I did not look at the RFP, but the question I have, and that some of the work we're gonna do as part of the report is to look at the RFP. One is, I don't know if you have to be, you know, a 501c3 or what qualifications you have to have in order to get a contract with Metro to do some of that work. And what we do know is that there are other cities who are doing things like providing micro grants to the grassroots organizations, which is essentially what we, you know, have done in, you know, joining an initiative with PATH. The other thing is we know that other cities are using some of the administrative portion of the funds, right? So you get $20 million. This last bit was 20 million. We're getting another 9 million. But some of that can be used for administrative purposes. And there are other cities who have used some of those administrative funds to do what I think some incredible things and answer some of the recommendations that we heard. One would be like more housing navigators to help folks who are losing their homes, right, to find another place. And I know Memphis is paying for attorneys to be right there in the court who are not subject to the congressional restrictions that legal aid is subject to. And they're right there to represent some tenants in the process. And the city is supporting that through some of the administrative funds. And so these are the kinds of recommendations, you know, what our goal in our office is to do is to hear those recommendations and then look at what other cities are doing and turn them into actual, like, this is how we can do it.
Can I add one more piece to that, Mel, is that I truly believe, and I know every city is different, but I truly believe the subgranting model is the best way to, like, subgranting to grassroots groups is the best way to really take care of the situation. If MAC is able to just see, like, okay, here are the 16 groups or whatever many groups that we've given money to, and we're managing them, and the groups who are on the ground and doing this work anyway, they are the messengers that the community trusts. What happens is that there is a trust that is built between grassroots groups and Metro, and then they are also the trusted messengers to community. I mean, we see it with electoral work, right? Whenever there's sub-grants for grassroots groups to do voter registration, community believes in that. We see it in housing. We see it in so many different issues. And I really would strongly recommend that really highlighting that model in the report would be great.
I have a couple of questions. I think they're more so directed to Mel and Liz. The first one would be, I think it's great that we're focusing on the mechanics of the eviction process. But one of the things that I found as a housing advocate is that in the rare cases where you were able to work with a housing navigator, there's not a lot of housing. So can some of this money be used to expand housing? And I don't know exactly how that would look like, but what are the restrictions on this money? And perhaps it's not a question for now, and perhaps we gotta do some research on that, but can we use it to get more Section 8 vouchers? Can we use it to perhaps increase the infrastructure of MDHA to be able to move more quickly? And I guess, so that's my first question. And then my second question was kind of related to that. Is there a deadline to spend this money? And if so, when is that?
Well, let me answer part of that. I actually read through the thing from the U.S. Treasury, and no, those funds are specific in that regard. Now, there was another group of COVID-related monies that were coming to the city to be used, and the way that sounds, it's to recover from the impact of COVID, to do whatever with COVID. It seems a bit broad. That, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it was going to be 2 of those payments to equal up to maybe $270 million or so. Now, that may be something in that could be a possibility, but from what I read in the, because I was going back and forth with Mac over what Eddie Latimer said in the thing was that he feels that there's this, everybody that shows up to apply gets this sense that they're there to try to beat somebody and that they're treated in that way. And one good example was you had to show where you were affected by COVID, but then on the other hand, the CDC had approved a form that you would just attest under penalty of perjury that you had been. The other way is that you show all of your wage stubs prior to COVID, then the letter from your employer where you got laid off and all this other stuff. But they were late to the game of just allowing a person to attest under penalty of perjury that I've been affected. So I don't think it's much latitude in that money. And I saw our legal rep shaking his head early, so he may have a little bit of knowledge on that. And he looks
Study of the U.S. Treasury guidelines. There's 2 purposes for those funds. They're limited to, of course, residential tenant situations, and they are for rent arrearages and for utility bill arrearage. And so that's the purpose of the funds. So the other ideas may be available through other resources, but so far, and to Reverend Tucker's or Chairperson's statement earlier about some other funds, some that had been previously dispersed, provided some prospective relief with respect to payments of mortgages, but that was under the CARES Act funding, I believe. Currently, these funds are available under the American Recovery Plan funding, but there may be some more forthcoming.
And my understanding was that the funds were available. Somehow the date of July 2023 sticks in my brain about how long the funds are available. And I think that the point that you're making is the reason why we have a second session on affordable housing. We wanted to address the eviction issue first, but recognizing that affordable housing was a much more complicated issue.
Yeah, and my understanding is that actually the end of last year, it was CARES Act fund. This 20 million and the additional 9 are actually called ERA funds. And the American Recovery Plan is the additional 270 million.
Okay, so the American Recovery.
Right, the American Recovery, yeah. They are, and
Direct appropriation from the federal government of the initial 20, or turned out to be close to 21 million, if I recall.
yes.
didn't go through the state or anything, but it came directly to Metro, but is governed by the facts, FAQs that the Treasury, and they've dribbled those out, just for your information. They began with strict, then they got less strict, and have gradually, as experiences are vetted with them, but the speed with which the bureaucracy works is not manageable by us, but up to the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah, and I want to be, I want to put out there that we're not alone here in Nashville, right? The struggle that we've had is replicated in cities all over the country. In fact, just the week before we had our hearing, there was a big article in the Washington Post about this very issue and the challenges that cities across the country are facing in getting these ERA funds out, in part because the Treasury dribbled out the, recommendations, and that their requirements were too stringent for the communities that we're trying to serve here. So we're definitely not alone. But we're Nashville, so we want to do better.
And I don't know if you all saw in the newspaper, Judge Bell, doing her testimony, made mention that it would be easier if all the detainer warrants were sent through legacy court. The presiding judge signed an order to that effect so that all of the general sessions courts will send their eviction detainer warrants to Judge Bell's court, where the other apparatus of the NRC and PATH and all those other people are. So that did happen, and I think that's just one of the many things that need to happen. We are running out of time, and I think we do need to give way to discussion around the planning and goals for the October 6th public hearing. And I know that Mel had sent out a doodle poll for the planning meeting, so I'll let you pick up there on far as that logistical part. And then I'd like to use some of the remaining time to solicit the goals and things that the commission as a whole would like to try to make sure that we have in this process. Mel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Tucker. Yes, the according to the doodle poll, the planning committee, the earliest time we could get even 3 people together in a room was the 20th. So I know that's cutting it pretty close when we want to do this on the 6th. So what I think I would recommend is if you all talk about generally the goals, and what you want to accomplish in the next one, and then on the 20th, that morning, the planning committee will decide on the actual human beings that we want to invite, and I could get those invitations out. Chair Tucker and I can commit to getting those invitations out like that day or that evening.
Well, I'm concerned a little bit that from the 20th to the 6th, when we start talking about public safety, there will be some community groups, but we're going to want Metro there. We're going to want the police department there. So I don't know if it was at all possible for us to try to shoot that out again and maybe try to meet earlier so we can give them as much advance notice as possible. Because I'm just afraid that that this has the ability to be maybe a bit contentious, and they don't have to come. And I like to give them as much advance notice. And I don't know if that's cutting it too short. If you all don't think it is, then we can move forward with just meeting on the 20th.
I agree. I feel good about going earlier than the 20th. I think that's the move. And if 3 of us can't get in the room, if it's 2 of us, and if I'm not that one person, I, again, will say that I trust fellow commissioners to get the job done. So, and I think that the other thing is that the doodle poll was sent to the committee, right? I forgot what it's called. But like, I think if there's other commissioners that could join, then, let them jump in.
I apologize. The hearing is scheduled for September 20th.
October
No,
6th.
October 6th.
This is just the planning committee?
Okay. I thought you were talking about the hearing committee. I'm just concerned that we accommodate and comply with whatever open meetings notification requirements could attach.
Yeah.
So I apologize.
Yeah, and it does attach to the committee, so like, the minute I know, we will definitely publish within a reasonable period. So that does put a restriction on it too, you all. But even, and maybe I'll get pushback from my good legal friend over here. But even if I get it out tomorrow, I think that would satisfy if we met on Friday, like Tuesday to Friday.
I apologize. For a special called meeting?
No, just for the planning committee.
But is it at its called time, regular time, or is it going to be a special?
No, it's just
call?
special called.
Let me discuss with you. I think you may need a little more time, unless it's an emergency call, then the law is pretty strict on what's considered an emergency. So let me just get a little more background, and I'll advise you accordingly. And I certainly will attempt to make it as, the window as least restrictive as possible, but we need to be cognizant of the Tennessee Open Meetings Act.
Well, I think the option here is, I think on the one hand, meeting on Friday, meeting on Mondays, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. On the other hand, if you wanted to think about pushing back the date of October 6th, which I think is what Chair Tucker was suggesting, that gives a little bit more time to have the planning, also get the notice out as far as who the groups are going, who we want to have present, and provide a little more space.
And let me just tell you right now, even given the logistical hassle of that change, and maybe Barbara's gonna say I'm crazy, the staff will absolutely welcome moving it, because October 6th is also our diversity training, our mobile diversity seminar training with the police academy that same day. And I was like, I don't know how we're gonna do this. There's 4 of us.
Actually, I am going to weigh in. The restriction with October the 6th day is general services and MNN. That was the date that we were able to coordinate with those 2 entities to have that forum.
But my understanding is we suggested October 6th, right? That it wasn't, that was the only date available, but I could be wrong.
I would check. It seemed pretty limited, but I'll confirm that.
Okay, because I was just, it was just the 20th and the 6th just appeared a little too close for me. So either way,
Well, and I will take responsibility too for not getting that committee together faster.
no, everybody has 20 things that they are involved in. So no, I don't think there's anything there. But let's talk a little bit about what we want to try to accomplish with this. We talked briefly at the last meeting, and then in our executive planning meeting for this hearing, we talked quite a bit about it. So around public safety, and one of the things that I believe kind of agreed upon as a consensus is that public safety is more than just policing. And so, but often when it's talked about in a political sense, that is what it means, is policing. But I think for the average citizen, public safety is around not just policing, it's around your overall general safety and well-being in a community and those things that contribute to that, which in some level, just the availability of food and housing figures into public safety. So as we open this up, what do we want to accomplish? That pause is in place of a question, just to be clear, so.
I mean, it would seem to me that there's been a lot of discussion in the city about alternatives to policing, and I think we need to build in some space for having a robust discussion about alternatives to policing. You know, there's the violence interrupters program. There are other things that are out there that we should be able to and should give voice to, so those can be part of more mainstream conversation.
I think a goal, you know, similar to how I think I felt very enlightened hearing from the woman who represented the property owners. You know, I definitely want to hear kind of I want to hear from from MNPD about kind of what they're seeing and you know, I think that there's some transparency that we might be able to get or glean from the questions that we may ask.
I have a question. Were we going to discuss the letter that we received that kind of started the hearings?
Yes.
Is that going to be a part of the agenda?
Well, yes, we were. Yeah, I tell you what, great question. If I can change midstream, we were to prepare a response for them. How are we on that?
I have a draft.
Okay. And because I think that the point you make is so clear is that I've talked with a couple of the members of the NAACP, and they are wondering, what are we going to do? So I think we do need to do that. So if you have a draft, can you just send it out to everybody? And when you get it, if you can make your comments around it or whatever, and what you think about it. And if we can do that pretty quickly and get it back to Mel and staff.
And I meant too with that, if the topic, just because I think they wanted to actually speak towards that in the hearing. So if the idea is to broaden it out to tackle those bigger issues like we're speaking, or make space specifically about the letter itself, was another throwing that out there.
Well, who are you pointing at there? Okay.
Just again, on the process you alluded to, if you're going through mail circulating that, if she could check with me, again, Open Meetings Act issues may be at play, so we need to make sure that the comments are received in compliance with the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
I just deliver the bad news, I don't.
I tend to be, pay quite a bit of attention, and
I just didn't want.
yeah. So I put everything blind copied, so they don't even have an opportunity to accidentally converse with each other. It always only comes to me.
But I guess I'd like to ask you, Mr. Smith, have you read the letter from the NAACP?
I have read the letter from the NAACP, but what I'm addressing is the process of you all
no, I'm clear on that.
deliberating on your response to it.
I'm clear on that, but I have a question to you based on if you have
just because I read it doesn't mean I can answer your question, but I'll do my best.
For us to address that letter in the way that they're saying, are there anything legally that jumps out at you that we should be aware of in our planning, or as we continue to talk about this?
No, I believe you, within your powers, have the discretion you're exercising. If you have a specific question about another remedy that you'd seek to employ, I certainly would need to review that on a case-by-case basis. But based on what you're doing now and your intended response following the accumulation of the information you're gathering in public forums, that seems to be an adequate way to go about it. But that, I can't give you policy reasons or that type of thing, but
Yeah.
legally, I think you're acting consistent with your powers and authority.
All right, thank you. You good? All right.
Well,
I mean, just to follow up on what Commissioner Safdie was saying, so the letter really addressed 4 different areas. It addressed officer-involved killings. It involved hiring practices within the police department. It addressed the discretion, the exercise of discretion by the district attorney general with respect to reaching a settlement. And there was one more, I can't recall right now. Excuse me. Oh, actually, it was, and the Metro budget. So it seems to me that if we were to fashion a response, we could certainly do that in a letter, but I think our hearing should address those 4 areas.
Okay. Any comments around what Erwin is saying here? That we would shape it around those 4 things, but I would also want to include this broader idea of public safety. And if we're going to talk about the officer killings and the hiring and we're definitely going to have the police department here. And it may need to be more than just one person to be able to speak to these respective areas. And I guess we can attempt to reach out and see how much that the DA would be able to talk about or will talk about or come and talk about that. He has not spoken at all about it since it occurred. And I found that interesting in that he's been asked in a couple of places I've been. So I think those are all good questions that we're going to have to, and then I think that that's even more reason why we may need a little bit more time. Whereas in this one, you sent out a blanket set of guidance questions that they put together how they appeared. Here, I don't know if we'll be able to come up with a blanket set of questions because this is kind of specific that the NAACP raised issues of the Attorney General's use of his discretion and that they want to hear about that.
I do want to say, I think one thing that, for lack of a better metaphor, both sides talk about is trust between community and law enforcement. And I think one guiding question or one goal we could talk about is just how does each person we bring in, what is their opinion of how much trust there is between community and law enforcement and what they would do to improve? I think those are 2 questions that will bring a myriad of answers and will help us shape to put together a strong report. But I think just having everyone in the same room and just even seeing how, you know, some people might say, I think there's a lot of trust, and somebody might say there's no trust at all, right? And so just to help highlight how each person, how each group views the trust that's there, I think that would be helpful. Luckily, it is not my job to figure out how to put that into words, so good luck to the staff.
Can we also look at having MNPD address the whole issue of policing in schools as well?
Okay, you guys. We want, I'm going to speak on behalf of my staff and myself. We want to deliver for you all the thing, the product, the process that addresses what is at the core of what you all want to address. But, so far what I've been hearing is, it's pretty, it's really broad, right? Like now you're addressing a lot of different issues. So I will say that the Nashvillians voted overwhelmingly for the creation of an oversight board for the police. And while this body retains jurisdiction to address discrimination complaints, I do think that it's important to let the COB do the COB things, right? So if we're talking about specific incidents or even specific policies, like M&PD policies, like that's the work of the COB. And quite frankly, they have some decent resources and a larger staff to address those kinds of things. And I'm encouraged by the ideas of, trust across different demographics. I think that's definitely well within sort of your purview. I think questions of alternatives to policing, as a civil right or human right, I think is well within your purview. And I also think that it would be great if we could get General Funk to have some conversation about around the Delkey plea. I don't necessarily know if this hearing is the right space for that. I know there was some discussion about trying to convene a more private sort of mediation conversation, maybe with the NAACP and General Funk. And I do like that idea.
Just to be clear, I wasn't really addressing the Delkey plea itself. I was really addressing the policy that would be followed by the DA's office in making those decisions. And because I think there is sensitivity, to that particular issue that should be handled in some other way. Sensitivity to the Delkey decision, that should be handled in some other way.
Yes.
But there is a policy that should be applied, and the letter implied that there was a different decision made in policy with respect to this that would fall within a broader scope of trust in communities and also discriminatory decision-making.
Understood, thank you.
Commissioner Diaz.
I would like to propose, in the spirit of letting the COB do what the COB does, to focus on alternatives to policing. I think that's a really broad topic where we can bring in social workers, where we can bring there's a whole alliance coalition of groups in town that have been thinking very deeply about this, including the SRO's issue in the schools, including housing issues, including a myriad of other issues. So in the spirit of giving the COB its place, I would like to propose that. I don't know what other people think.
Well, I would say to that, I would like for the COB to take part, to maybe help amplify them from just what I know about. I attend a lot of their board meetings, and I don't think what I was thinking of would not have been stepping on their toes. They have gathered so much data. They have a lot of reports that they have generated that this would be another avenue for them to come and to give those and to lay those down. But no, I do agree that the COB's got a job to do, and that we don't want to even appear to be encroaching on that. But in the general sense, we still have to talk about policing. And so while the COB is concrete in what their job is to analyze this, because there is a ordinance that establishes them, but so much of everything else, like the charter, the way that the charter is, I've always wrestled with this. The city voted for civilian oversight of the police department. But in practice, you don't have that. There is no oversight. The way the police chief is situated, he has to accept. The COB cannot make the police department do anything. So some people actually think that the Community Oversight Board is just that. But it's really not, when you have to debate and go back and forth, whereas where you would have a police commission or commissioners, they would actually have some type of hierarchical authority with them. That's not what the COB set up here. And if you just listen to the back and forth, it's a negotiation. The chief agrees or the chief does not agree, or so again, I think maybe that might need to be cleared up for the public too, because people think that we have civilian oversight of the police department when in effect we don't.
I do appreciate that, and it seems that having a representative from the COB be one of the invited presenters for your hearing is, I think that's an obvious one.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left. I do want to honor the time. Are there any other things that you want to throw out as we wait to try to move forward with either the 20th meeting date, or if after consultation with Mr. Smith, we could do it legally earlier, that we would move to do that?
So just real quickly, just to give context to the public safety topic here, which is because we were talking about the Brookmead encampment and the removal of unsheltered people. And so part of the goal here was to give some context, to decriminalize poverty, right? So when we talk about the alternatives to policing, it's also to advocate for those who otherwise are criminalized, be they poor, be they of color, be they of, whatever that may be. And so part of this is to redefine what public and safety mean. In other words, this city does not look upon the unsheltered as those who deserve anything. Right, so that's part of our goal. And so if we can kind of bend our programming to the alternatives of policing towards that as a reason to find other resources to do that, then that would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner Tran.
So I just want to make sure that we have sort of our marching orders correct in the office. One, we will look into alternative dates to the October 6th hearing, like if it can be pushed a week. So that will be, a week and a half, like we'll look at what is available. Being able to be in the other part of Sonny West over here, which we all just call A and B as shorthand. We're in C and D right now. But if we're in A and B, the technology is easier. And, there's parking, there's all kinds of logistical reasons why being in that space is beneficial. It doesn't mean that's the only place we can have the hearing. It just makes it easier, but it's not impossible to set this up elsewhere. So we'll look into that. And then get out a solid letter to the NAACP in response to the complaint made. And unless I hear otherwise, I think we'll just move forward with the September 20th planning meeting date and time. Because that can be published tomorrow or even tonight. I could send out that agenda tonight, and we can have that on Monday. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Well, we still have the director's report and announcements. So is that
Well, the director's report, I have provided a written director's report. And for transparency, this written director's report will also be appended to our published minutes. So if constituents are following what we are doing, they can also see the director's report in our minutes. But the one thing that I would hope we could just spend a couple minutes on is the appointment by the Metro Human Relations Commission to the Procurement Standards Board. So as you all, as some of you may recall, there was legislation passed by Metro Council addressing a number of issues related to procurement and procurement standards. Most of that ordinance has been preempted by state legislation. Pretty much nearly all of it. But one piece that Metro Legal has determined survives the state preemption is that one of the appointments to the Procurement Standards Board shall be made by the Metro Human Relations Commission. And then that will be confirmed by a majority vote of Metro Council. So the question then is the process by which this body wants to make that appointment. And so my understanding is it cannot be one of you. You're already serving on a Metro Board or Commission. And that appointment can be done through a committee. There could be like strict formal, like we could have a committee meet to adopt strict rules and regulations and procedure for doing it. At this point, my recommendation would be to have the executive board meet and put together a recommendation for the full board as to how that appointment should be made.
And let me just throw in there and you tell me, because I remember that the commission entertained many folk leading up to the passage of this and talked about why it was so important and all of that. So we've been involved in it from the beginning, that there may be individuals who are on the commission that may have persons that would be good, that we could submit names and vet those names in some kind of way. Because this has been an ongoing process. I know that Workers' Dignity and a couple of others were, for years, have been pushing for this. And there may be some names that could just come up through the long process of that our person that's nominated could maybe give voice or face to some of that. I don't know, I don't know whether I said what I said right or whatever. Because I've been watching Mr. Smith's head when everybody's talking. He's either doing nothing or he's like, and then he's.
Like, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain or whatever. And I think, right, there's no set rule or process by which this body is to make the nomination. So you all can determine that. And I think, right, one option might be that commissioners do the sort of recommendation, and then those folks get vetted in some way. Or you could adopt a more public-facing, like a call for nominations. But I think that however you want to do it, I think it would, I think it would be best if the executive board meets, talks about that, and then brings their recommendation back to the full commission for approval.
Is there a time limit or is there a time frame that we're working toward that I think would?
I have no idea.
Okay, all right. So, okay.
Can I say something real quick? Just to plant in the executive committee's head when they're talking about this, I think it would be great if that person who's in that procurement board is a construction worker themselves.
Duly noted, duly noted. So I guess when we do get together, we will try to think up some kind of way to generate names from, I think, within this body, maybe to be vetted by the executive committee, to be presented to the board for a full vote. But one thing that I would like to see is that members of the commission who've been involved in this submit names, particularly of people who have been real close to this work.
And for the benefit of our newer members, even if you're not on the executive board, like when the executive board is meeting to have this conversation, it too is an open meeting. So any member is welcome to join that meeting and be heard. So I will once we determine a date and time for the executive board meeting, I'll let everybody know. So if, for instance, Jorge or Commissioner Diaz, if you have a particular interest, you would definitely be welcome to join the conversation.
Is that it? If you don't stop me, it seems like that may be it for today. Again, I am grateful to be part of this body, and I'm even grateful now, as I said last meeting, to serve as the chair, coming behind folks like Dr. Richmond. And I think that hearing was just really phenomenal, and all the work that everyone put into it was so amazing. It actually made me look good as chair, and which now I did take all of that. Whatever came my way in that, I looked like I was riding on that. But I just appreciate everybody's willingness to get behind this and to do this, and then to agree to do this month after month after month till we get it done, and the time that it takes, in spite of what all of you all are already doing, multiple things in your jobs, in the community, and wherever else you show up. So I'm grateful for that.
The last announcement I have before we adjourn is we made some additional copies of the sort of commission board book. And even if you're not a new member, if you don't know what you did with your book and you just want another one, we made copies for you. So please take one of the books.
We will entertain a motion to adjourn.
May I just say one thing? Ironically, just to reiterate what Mel said earlier. Ironically, the next forum is on policing and public safety. It is also the exact same day of the next diversity training for the police department, which is Wednesday, October the 6th. So I just wanted to remind you of that.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you again.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.